In this talk, we will learn about the transport of water in vascular plants. The growth of all organisms require water and nutrients. The acquisition of nutrients and water is easy in unicellular organisms or in cells in general. This acquisition can happen through passive transport, where we can have solutes or substances move from a high concentration gradient to a low concentration gradient. In the context of a cell, this can happen directly through the plasma membrane through diffusion, or we can have proteins present in the plasma membrane that facilitate this movement, and hence is called as facilitated diffusion. Passive transport does not require any energy, and the flow of transport is always from the region of high concentration to the region of low concentration. Active transport is another transport mechanism which requires energy. In active transport, solutes or substances always move from a region of low concentration to high concentration. The acquisition of nutrients and water is, however, more challenging in multicellular organisms. Plants are examples of multicellular organisms who are photoautotrophs. They are able to acquire water and nutrients by different mechanisms. This includes passive transport and active transport that is normally used by the cells of the plant. We also observe the phenomenon of bulk flow, which is observed in the entire organism. Bulk flow is a type of long-distance transport where the transport of fluid is driven by a pressure gradient. Thus, the fluid and the substances dissolved in the fluid are able to move from a region of high pressure to a region of low pressure. Plants do not possess a pump, which is observed in some animals. In some animals, we are able to see the transport of fluids using a heart which functions as a pump. This is absent in the case of plants. Plants have different routes to transport substances from one cell to another cell. The apoplastic route is where the substances are transported through the cell walls and extracellular spaces of the plant cells. In fact, apoplast means everything that's external to the plasma membrane. Thus, it includes the cell wall and extracellular space. However, in case the cell is dead, the apoplast also includes the interior of dead cells. The symplastic route, on the other hand, involves the transport of substances through the cytosol of the plant cells. The water and solutes cross the plasma membrane of a cell only once to enter from the environment, and once they're inside a cell, these solutes and water can travel through the plasmodesmata of the plant cells. The plasmodesmata are pore-like structures that are present between neighboring cells. They allow for the transport of substances between two cells without involving any transport outside the cell. The symplast is the cytosol of all the living cells, which includes the plasmodesmata. The transmembrane route is where substances repeatedly cross the plasma membrane as they pass from one cell to another cell. Like all living organisms, water is essential for the life of plants. The intake of water is easy for unicellular organisms as they have evolved proteins like aquaporins that mediate the transport of water inside the cell. However, water intake is more challenging for multicellular organisms like plants, and hence they must evolve special structures or systems to obtain and transport water. The first plants that arose were the non-vascular plants. These plants evolved rhizoids, which help with anchoring the plant as well as transporting water. As time passed, vascular plants evolved. Vascular plants have organ systems, which include the shoot system and the root system. The root system is the part of the plant that takes up water and minerals from below the ground and is able to transport it to other parts of the plant. The root system also provides support to the plant. The root system is made up of roots. There are different types of roots depending on the plant. We can have a taproot where there is a primary root and from which lateral branches are able to arise, which are called as lateral roots. We can also have plants that have a fibrous root where there is no primary root and hence all the roots have a similar thickness. Some plants have adventitious roots, which are roots that arise from other parts of the plant like stems. Roots are organs that are present below the ground and hence help in anchoring the plant. They also absorb water and minerals from the soil, and some roots have the ability to store carbohydrates. To do so, they must first obtain the sugars from shoots in order to store them. The roots of almost all plants form mycorrhizal associations, which are symbiotic relationships with certain types of fungi. This helps the root in order to obtain water in a more effective manner. The first root that emerges is called as the primary root. The primary root can then give rise to branches called as lateral roots. These lateral roots improve anchorage as well as water absorption because there is an increase in the surface area. The different tissues found in roots include the outer dermal tissue, which forms the epidermis. The epidermis of roots lacks the cuticle, which is a waxy substance that prevents water loss. They're usually found in the epidermis of stem and leaves, but not in roots. The epidermis cells do form root hairs that allows better absorption of water. In addition to dermal tissue, vascular tissues are also found in roots. The vascular tissues are usually found in the form of vascular bundles. These vascular bundles include phloem that is present on the outer side and xylem that is present in the more interior end. This bundle of vascular tissue is also called as the stele in vascular plants. Between the dermal and the vascular tissues, we can find the ground tissue. The ground tissue is sometimes also called as the cortex. In the roots of monocots, there is layers of ground tissue present within the vascular bundle. This layer of ground tissue is called as the pith. Vascular tissues comprise of xylem and phloem. Xylem transports water and minerals to different parts of the plant. The cells that make up xylem are dead and are lignified at maturity, indicative that they have thick secondary cell walls that have lignin as part of them. There are two types of cells found in xylem. The tracheids are dead cells that taper at an end and overlap with one another at those tapered ends. The vessels are the other cell type found in xylem, which are continuous tubes of dead cylindrical cells that are arranged end to end. At the ends of these vessel cells, there are perforation plates, and this allows the easy transport of water and minerals. In order to reach the xylem of the roots, water and minerals first have to be absorbed by the root. This absorption of water and minerals occurs near root tips. At the root tips, we have epidermal cells that have root hairs. These root hairs increase the surface area so that water can be absorbed more efficiently and more amount of water can be absorbed. Roots can also form associations with fungal hyphae that can further increase the surface area and allow the root to obtain more water. There is evidence that this association of fungi with plant roots helped plants colonize land and become more terrestrial. There are two main types of mycorrhizae. Ectomycorrhizae are those where some members of Basidiomycota associate with the roots, but the hyphae or mycelia do not penetrate the root cells. On the other hand, endomycorrhizae are when the fungi that belong to the group of Glomeromycota associate with the plant root cells and are able to penetrate through the cell wall of the plant root cells. It should be noted that they do not penetrate the plasma membrane. These mycorrhizae are also called as arbuscular mycorrhizae. This relationship between the plant and the fungus allows the fungus to provide water and minerals to the plant, and in return, it gains nutrients from the plant. Water enters the root through the dermal tissues, which is made up of the epidermis that have hair-like appendages, which are the root hairs. Once the water enters, it can be transported from one cell to another to the apoplastic root, where it flows through the cell walls of the plant cells, or the symplastic root, where the transport occurs to the plasmodesmata. The water then passes through the ground tissue, which is also called as the cortex, and ultimately reaches the endodermis layer, which is also a part of the cortex. The endodermis is the innermost part of the root cortex and surrounds the vascular bundle. It forces the water and minerals to move through the symplastic root and does not allow them to move through the apoplastic root. It is able to do so because the cells of the endodermis have a waxy coating on their cell wall, which is called as the Casparian strip. The Casparian strip repels water and minerals, and hence it prevents the apoplastic transport of water. In order for the water to reach the vascular bundle, they have to use the symplastic route, which is through the plasmodesmata of the endodermal cells. By preventing apoplastic transport, the Casparian strip is able to protect the plant by preventing any type of toxins from entering the vascular tissues and then being transported to different parts of the plant. By using the symplastic route, these toxins can be detected by the plant. After passing through the endodermis, water and minerals can now enter the xylem tracheids and vessels. In this scenario, they now travel through the apoplastic route. It should be remembered that tracheids and vessels are dead cells, and hence there is no symplast present. Thus, all transport there occurs through the apoplast. Upon entry into the xylem, the water and any minerals associated with it move upwards towards the shoot system of the plant through the process of bulk flow. The upward movement of water in the xylem is promoted by the process of transpiration. Transpiration is the evaporation of water from the plant surface. It is a physiological process that helps the plant cool itself and plays important roles in osmoregulation. The water vapor is normally lost from the leaves through the stomatal openings. Transpiration can also explain why the temperature is cooler in places where there are lots of plants and trees, as opposed to areas where there is no plants or trees. The loss of water from the surface pulls the water upwards, similar to how water rises when it is sucked through a straw. This upward pull promotes the absorption of water by the roots. In fact, in a plant, there is a continuous water column formed in the xylem. This continuous water column is formed due to certain properties of the xylem as well as of water. The tracheids and vessels of the xylem are small in diameter. The properties of water allow a continuous column to form through the cohesion of water, which is the ability of water molecules to interact with one another, and the adhesion of water, which is the ability of water molecules to interact with other substances. In this case, that other substance is the xylem. There have been few hypotheses to explain how water is transported in the xylem, but the most widely accepted one is the cohesion tension hypothesis. According to this hypothesis, transpiration and cohesion of water work together to promote water transport. Let us look how this process works. Water vapor that is present in the air spaces of leaves diffuses out through the stomatal openings. This loss of water vapor in the leaves causes changes in the surface tension of water in the cells that are present near the stomata. Let us consider one such cell. As water vapor in its environment is lost, the water that's present in the cell wall of this cell starts evaporating. As more and more water evaporates, the surface tension of the water film present in that cell wall increases. Surface tension is the ability of a water surface to form a net that can hold other objects. The surface tension of water is what allows some insects to walk on water. The increase in surface tension in the cells that are near the stomatal openings causes water to be pulled from the surrounding areas into these cells. This water can come from extracellular spaces, or it can come from other cells that are nearby. As water is pulled into the cells that have lost water, the water leaves the xylem and enters the surrounding tissues. The loss of water from the xylem in the leaves results in water to be pulled upwards from lower parts of the plant. The water moves as a column due to the cohesion between the water molecules. The water column in the plant is maintained by the absorption of water from the roots. Thus, changes in the surface tension of water through transpiration and cohesion of water as it travels upwards to replace the water that is lost allows water to move against gravity. It should be noted that the process of transpiration, which drives this whole phenomenon, is a thermodynamically favored process as the amount of water vapor in the environment is always less than the amount of water vapor in the leaves. Plants must have mechanisms to regulate the rate of transpiration and the rate of water absorption from the roots. In scenarios where the environment is hot, the rate of transpiration usually exceeds the rate of water absorption. In such scenarios, the plant gets dehydrated, and we can observe this dehydration in the form of the wilting of leaves. In such scenarios, the plant will cause the guard cells to close the stomatal openings to prevent water loss. The guard cells are able to close the stomatal openings to the actions of abscisic acid. Abscisic acid is made in response to the dehydration, and it binds to receptors present on the guard cells. This causes the opening of ion channels, and there is a loss of potassium and chloride ions from the guard cells. The increase of potassium and chloride ions in the environment causes water to be lost from the guard cells. This loss of water from the guard cell causes it to become flaccid and results in the closing of the stomata. In cases where the rate of transpiration is less than water absorption, then the excess water present in the plant must be lost because there is too much water. In such situations, water is secreted in the form of droplets on the tips or edges of leaves. This phenomenon is called as guttation. Guttation plays an important role in maintaining water balance in the plant. Guttation is different than dew because dew is normally formed when the environmental water vapor condenses on leaves. Severe conditions like drought or freezing temperatures can cause a disruption in the water column. One example of such a disruption is cavitation, where the presence of air bubbles can cause a break in the water column. It is absolutely essential for plants to have alternative routes or mechanisms in order to overcome cavitation. Plants have evolved alternative pathways for liquids to flow in order to overcome cavitation. Another way to resolve cavitation is by adding new xylem to the process of secondary growth. Plants have evolved adaptations to prevent water loss when there are drought conditions. Drought conditions normally imply that there is a scarcity of water. Plants induce dormancy or in some cases reduce the surface area of their leaves so that there is less water loss. They can also have spines instead of leaves. Some plants cover their leaves with the cuticle and woolly trichomes to prevent water loss. Plants can also reduce the number of stomata or modify their leaves to store water. Like all other parts of the plant, roots need oxygen for respiration in order to get energy to do the functions that they are meant to do. However, when flooding happens, it is hard to obtain oxygen. In such cases, the plant adapts to the flooding by forming larger lenticels and adventitious roots. They can also form parenchyma, which are loose parenchymal tissues with large air spaces. Plants can also evolve mechanisms to collect oxygen from the air and transport it to the submerged parts of the plant. They have done this by evolving pneumatophores, which are long, spongy, air-filled roots that emerge above the mud. This is normally seen in mangroves and those kinds of plants that live in swamps. These pneumatophores are able to provide oxygen from the air to the roots that are submerged below the water. With this, we come to the end of our talk where we learned about different transport mechanisms observed in cells as well as transport routes that are observed in plants. We learned about the role of roots in water transport as well as how water is obtained from soil and transported through the xylem. We learned about the role of transpiration in water transport and the cohesion tension hypothesis that explains water transport through xylem. We finally learned about different adaptations that plants have evolved in relation to water or oxygen stress.